My daughter always loved telling the truth. When I asked her if she thought I was pretty, she looked right at me and said, "Honestly, Mom, you are the ugliest mom at my whole preschool." When my mother-in-law pointed her finger in my face and called me a wasteful spender for buying her an expensive backpack, I asked my daughter how that made her feel. She smiled and said, "Honestly, I was pretty happy watching you get yelled at." My husband once joked with her, asking if she would take care of me when I got old. She scoffed. "I am not taking care of her. When she gets old, she should just hurry up and be put 6 feet under." My heart went completely cold, but her eyes curved into happy little crescents. I am just telling the truth. Later on, a detective came to our house doing a routine neighborhood canvass and asked my daughter a few standard questions. Once again, my daughter told the truth, but this time it was a truth she would regret for the rest of her life. The detective knocked on our door to update the local residential registry. My 7-year-old daughter, Brenda, blinked her big eyes and asked, "Why do you have to write our names down?" The detective gently patted her head. "It helps keep the neighborhood safe, and it helps us make sure bad people do not kidnap little kids." Brenda nodded, her face suddenly lighting up with an exaggerated look of realization. "Oh, I get it. You want to catch kidnappers. Well, isn't my mom one of those? She told me out of her own mouth yesterday that she kidnapped me." The smile froze completely on the detective's face. I stared at my daughter in absolute shock. Seeing the sly, calculating gleam in her eyes, my brain started to buzz. Brenda had a habit of saying honest things specifically designed to humiliate me and cause me pain. Just yesterday, I refused to let her eat too much junk food before dinner. She threw a fit, calling me an evil mother and screaming that she didn't want to be my daughter anymore. I was exhausted and furious, so I snapped back, "You're right, you aren't my daughter. I kidnapped you." At the time, she argued back saying she didn't believe me. I never imagined she would take a sarcastic comment she didn't even believe, package it as the truth, and feed it directly to a police officer. The detective was already looking at me with a completely different expression. I forced out a dry, awkward laugh. She was misbehaving yesterday and I lost my temper. It was just a stupid joke. I didn't think she would take it literally. The detective's brow relaxed slightly. He turned to Brenda. "Little girl, you can't joke about things like that. If your mom gets mistaken for a kidnapper, she could go to jail." Seeing Brenda nod, the knot in my chest finally loosened. I thought the ordeal was over, but a second later, Brenda looked up with an expression of pure, innocent sincerity. "But my mom can't have babies. If I wasn't kidnapped, where did I come from?" The scrutiny and suspicion instantly returned to the detective's eyes. I panicked and quickly tried to explain. "I had an IUD put in right after she was born. When kids hear about birth control, they misunderstand what can't have babies means." I tugged on Brenda's sleeve, silently begging her to stop talking. She refused to listen. "Mom couldn't have babies right after she got married, but I am already 7 years old." I had no idea how a 7-year-old girl possessed the mental capacity to connect those dots. But when you thought about what she was implying, it was impossible not to jump to horrible conclusions. My husband and I had been married for 6 years. I had an IUD for those exact 6 years. So how could we possibly have a 7-year-old daughter? The detective clearly did the math in his head. His expression turned dead serious. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see the child's birth certificate." My stomach dropped to the floor. There was no birth certificate for Brenda in this house. 6 years ago, I had literally fought off human traffickers to rip this child out of their hands. When the police eventually pulled the files on her biological parents, the reality left everyone speechless. My husband and I had looked at each other with pale faces, sharing the exact same thought. If we sent this poor baby back to her biological family, living with them would be a fate worse than death. We simply couldn't bear it. So we went through the system, adopted her, and raised her to this day. Brenda probably thought my angry comment yesterday was just a cruel joke, but she had no idea that the joke was actually the truth. The only reason we never told her was that we didn't want her to feel like an outsider in her own home. But now, if I didn't confess, this detective might actually put me in handcuffs. Just as I opened my mouth to explain the adoption, Brenda suddenly shrieked in mock excitement. "Oh, I remember now. Mom got pregnant out of wedlock. She had me before she got married. When the grown-ups talk about women being loose, this is what they mean, right?" I stood frozen in place. If things were really the way she was describing them, I would have wanted the floor to open up and swallow me out of shame. But my silence in that moment wasn't born of embarrassment. It was born of a chilling, profound heartbreak. Thinking she had successfully pierced my armor, the corners of Brenda's mouth curled up into a thrilled little smirk. "Mom, I am just telling the truth to help clear your name. You shouldn't be mad at me." The detective withdrew his intense gaze from me, shaking his head slightly as he finished writing down our information. In a corner where no one could see, my hands were curled into fists, my fingernails biting into my palms as I desperately pushed down the surge of bitter emotion. This was not the first time she had done something like this. Back when she was in preschool, she constantly praised other mothers in front of me, talking about how gorgeous they were. I asked her, "Do you think Mom isn't pretty?" Brenda stared dead into my eyes and said, "Mom, you are not pretty at all. You are the ugliest mom at the whole preschool." I was stunned. Seeing her eyes curved into happy little slits, clearly enjoying the moment, I couldn't help but speak up. When you say things like that, it really hurts Mom's feelings. To my surprise, she crossed her arms and put on a self-righteous face. But my teacher said good kids always tell the truth. I was left completely speechless. A strange, uneasy feeling took root in my chest. Logically speaking, young children usually have a natural, loving bias toward the people who raise them, especially regarding their looks. But Brenda was different. Later, when she started elementary school, I spent $100 buying her a shiny, branded frozen backpack she had been begging for. When my mother-in-law found out how much it cost, she marched over, pointed her finger right at my nose, and screamed at me for wasting Chris's hard-earned money. Brenda completely ignored the vicious scolding I was receiving. She treated the yelling as background music while she spun around the living room, dancing with her new bag. Later, I couldn't help but ask her, "When you heard Grandma yelling at me, did you have any thoughts about it?" Brenda rolled her eyes around for a second before locking them tightly onto mine. "Yeah, I thought it was super fun." Seeing the genuine, radiant smile on her face, my expression completely froze. She stared at me for a long time, drinking in my reaction, before adding her favorite line. "Don't be mad, Mom. I am just telling the truth." Just last month, Brenda caught a terrible flu. I didn't sleep for weeks, staying by her bedside day and night to nurse her back to health. When my husband, Chris, saw that I had lost 10 pounds from the stress, his heart broke. He asked Brenda, "Mom is working so hard to raise you. Are you going to take care of her when she gets old?" Brenda glanced at me, pouted her lips, and and said, "No way. When mom gets old, she needs to hurry up and go into the ground." Chris stiffened in shock. Every ounce of color drained from my face. Yet seeing our devastated reactions, Brenda actually started clapping and cheering, thrilled by the misery she had caused. I remained completely silent for the rest of the day. Brenda even had the nerve to ask me, "Mom, are you upset again just because I told the truth?" That night, I didn't close my eyes for a single second. Chris tossed and turned beside me. Breaking the heavy silence, he suddenly whispered, "Whenever she says those things, she has to just be joking, right?" Even his voice trembled with uncertainty. Every single time her words tore me to pieces, a brief flash of malicious joy would appear in her eyes. Then she would deploy her favorite excuse, using telling the truth to silence any complaints I had. Remembering all of this, my emotions were reaching a boiling point. I rushed to the door, eager to see the detective out and be done with this nightmare. "Mr. Detective," Brenda yelled out just as he stepped over the threshold, "if I find out my mom really is a kidnapper, can I call you to arrest her?" The detective gave Brenda a highly complicated look, then glanced back at me. Ultimately, he slipped a business card into Brenda's hand before walking away. After the detective left, Brenda tilted her head and studied my face. Seeing that I wasn't breaking down or yelling, a flash of deep disappointment crossed her eyes. I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Why did you say those things to the officer?" Brenda put her hands on her hips, lifting her chin with total arrogance. "Because I am a good kid who tells the truth. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. You are the one who got mad and said I was kidnapped." That confirmed it. She purposely fed that story to the police just to punish me for the angry comment I made yesterday. I tightened my fists and asked her one more question. "If mom really did steal you from human traffickers, but your real parents were terrible people and I kept you to protect you, would you still call the police and send me to prison?" Brenda nodded without a single second of hesitation. "Of course I would. Mom, I told you I am a good kid who tells the truth." My heart plunged straight into an icy abyss. Chris had come home from work quietly and had been standing in the hallway for a while. His face was terrifyingly dark. Still, he suppressed his anger, walked over, and patted my shoulder to comfort me. Maybe she will grow out of it when she gets older. Seeing Chris upset made Brenda happy again. She completely ignored our pain. I couldn't stop the thought from echoing in my head. If Chris and I spent half our lives pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into raising a vicious, ungrateful parasite, why shouldn't we cut our losses right now? But we had raised her for so many years. I wanted to give her one absolute final chance. I looked at the detective's business card sitting on the table and spoke deliberately. "Brenda, you really were kidnapped. Inside the safe in our bedroom, there is a file containing all your original records. It has the names of your biological parents on it. If you keep using your truths to intentionally break our hearts, your dad and I are going to pack your bags and send you back to your real family." Hearing my tone, the smugness vanished from her young face, replaced by a genuine, age-appropriate fear. She turned to Chris in a panic. "Dad, is she telling the truth?" Chris swallowed his disgust and sighed. "Your mom is just messing with you." The panic slowly faded from Brenda's face. She puffed out her cheeks and glared at me. "So it was a lie. I wish I actually had different parents. I hate you, Mom." Chris's expression darkened even further, but her entire focus was locked onto me. I played along, forcing a deeply wounded, heartbroken expression onto my face. Only then did her lips part into a satisfied, cruel smile. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Brenda truly believed she was our biological flesh and blood. Because she thought that bond was indissoluble, she felt completely emboldened to hurt me without any fear of consequences. Any remaining warmth in my heart completely froze over. Late that night, as I hovered on the edge of sleep, I heard the subtle click of the bedroom door handle turning. A tiny shadow slipped into the room. A minute later, the shadow sneaked back out. From the hallway outside, a deliberately hushed, childlike voice whispered into a phone. "Hello? Is this the police? Honestly, my mom really is a kidnapper. All the proof is hiding inside her safe. You need to come arrest her right now."
The second officer recognized me immediately. It was the same detective from yesterday. His expression became complicated the moment he saw Brenda bouncing with excitement. "Good morning," he said carefully. "Can we see the records?" "Of course." I opened the safe myself. Then I handed him everything. The adoption papers, the court orders, the police reports, the photographs. The detective's face grew increasingly grim as he flipped through the file. Finally, he closed it, very slowly. Then he looked down at Brenda. "Your mother isn't a kidnapper." Brenda's smile faltered. "What? She legally adopted you." The detective held up the paperwork. "Everything here was approved by the courts." Brenda blinked. "That can't be right." "It is." "But she said she kidnapped me." "She was angry." The detective paused. "Although technically she did rescue you." The room became silent. Brenda stared at him. "What do you mean rescue?" The detective looked at me. I gave a small nod. For years we had hidden the truth. Maybe that had been our mistake. The detective crouched to Brenda's level. "Your biological parents were arrested." The smile disappeared completely from her face. "They weren't good people." "How bad?" The detective hesitated. "Bad enough that a judge permanently terminated their parental rights." Brenda's eyes widened. The detective continued. "Your mother and father fought for years to adopt you." "That's a lie." "It isn't." He stood. "The paperwork is all here." For the first time in her life, Brenda looked genuinely shaken. Her eyes darted between me and Chris. "You adopted me?" "Yes," I answered. "You aren't my real parents?" "We are your parents." "But not my real ones?" Chris spoke quietly. "Being real isn't about blood." Brenda looked horrified, almost betrayed. The detective gathered the file. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." Then he left. The front door closed. The silence afterward felt deafening. A few seconds later Brenda burst into tears. Not because she had hurt us. Not because she felt guilty. Because suddenly, she wasn't special anymore. The certainty she had relied on her entire life was gone. "You lied to me," she screamed. I stared at her. "No." "You hid it." "Yes." "Why?" My voice came out surprisingly calm. "Because we loved you." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, there was no clever answer. No cutting remark. No cruel truth. That evening Chris and I sat at the kitchen table after she went to bed. Neither of us touched our food. Finally he spoke. "She never apologized." I nodded. "She won't." His eyes reddened. "We gave her everything." "I know. I don't understand how she became like this." Neither did I. The next morning we made a decision. If Brenda loved telling the truth so much, then she would learn that truth came with consequences. No more excuses. No more laughing off cruel behavior. No more rewarding emotional cruelty. Every insult, every lie disguised as honesty, every deliberate attempt to hurt someone would carry consequences. Real consequences. At first Brenda thought we were bluffing. When she called me ugly at breakfast, she lost television privileges for a week. When she mocked Chris for being upset, she lost her tablet. When she intentionally embarrassed a classmate at school and proudly announced she was just telling the truth, she spent an entire month volunteering after school writing apology letters and helping younger students. The first few weeks were war. She screamed, cried, accused us of being unfair. But something slowly changed. For the first time, hurting people stopped being fun. Because every time she did it, the world stopped rewarding her. Months passed. Then one evening I accidentally dropped a plate. It shattered across the kitchen floor. I stood there exhausted after a long day. Before I could react, Brenda quietly grabbed a broom. I stared. So I'm not useless after all? I asked lightly. A year earlier she would have laughed. Instead she looked embarrassed. No. Then she hesitated. I was wrong about that. The words were tiny, barely audible, but they stunned me. Because it was the first apology she had ever given. Years later, when Brenda was old enough to truly understand the adoption records, she locked herself in her room for an entire day. That night she came downstairs holding the file. Her eyes were red. Mom, I looked up. She stood frozen in the doorway. The confident little girl who loved hurting people was gone. In her place stood a teenager who finally understood. If you hadn't taken me, her voice cracked. What would have happened to me? I remembered the photographs, the police reports, the horrors we had spent years hiding, and I simply answered, you don't need to know. Tears spilled down her face. She walked across the room. Then, for the first time since she was a toddler, she wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry. 3 words. That's all. But after years of pain, they felt heavier than anything else in the world. And for the first time ever, when Brenda said something, I knew she was finally telling the truth. Brenda clung to me so tightly that my shoulder became damp with tears. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I slowly wrapped my arms around her. The room was silent except for her crying. Chris stood in the doorway, staring at us. His eyes were suspiciously red. Brenda finally pulled back. Her face was blotchy and swollen. I don't deserve you. The words were barely a whisper. A few years ago, hearing something like that from her would have felt like a victory. Instead, it only made my heart ache. No child deserves their parents, I said quietly. Parents choose to love their children anyway. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. But I was horrible. Neither Chris nor I answered. Because she was finally old enough to recognize that herself. And because some truths didn't need to be softened. She lowered her head. I used to like it. My stomach tightened. What? When people got upset. The confession came out in pieces. I liked seeing their faces. She swallowed. When Grandma yelled at you about the backpack, I thought it was funny. My chest hurt. When I told you that you were the ugliest mom at preschool, I knew it would make you sad. Chris slowly sat down. Brenda's hands were shaking. When Dad asked if I'd take care of you when you got old, her voice cracked. I said I wanted you dead, because I wanted to see what your face would look like. The room became completely still. Those words somehow hurt more now than they had years ago, because now she actually understood them. She wasn't saying them to wound me. She was saying them because she was horrified by herself. I don't know why I was like that. She buried her face in her hands. I don't know what was wrong with me. I exchanged a glance with Chris. For years we had asked ourselves the same question. Eventually we had learned part of the answer. Some children tested boundaries. Some children sought attention. Some children discovered early that pain was power. And once they learned they could control people through hurt, they kept doing it. Not because they were monsters. Because they were children. Children who hadn't learned empathy yet. The problem was that most children grew out of it naturally. Brenda hadn't. Not for a very long time. Until consequences finally forced her to confront what she was becoming. I reached across the table. She looked up. You know the difference between then and now? She shook her head. Back then, you enjoyed hurting people. I squeezed her hand. Now you feel guilty about it. She stared at me. That means you've changed. More tears spilled down her face. But what if I can't make up for it? You can't. She blinked. What? You can't erase it. I wasn't going to lie. The things you said happened. The people you hurt remember them. Her face fell. But I leaned forward. You can spend the rest of your life becoming someone better. Chris nodded. That's all any of us can do. For a long time Brenda sat there silently. Then she whispered, do you forgive me? The question hung in the air. Years of memories flashed through my mind. The detective. The insults. The laughter. The business card. The phone call. The countless nights I had cried after she went to sleep. I could have lied. Could have given the perfect movie answer. Instead I chose honesty. Not all at once. Her face crumpled. I continued. But I'm trying. Something in her expression softened. Because that answer was real. And for the first time in her life, she seemed to understand that real honesty wasn't supposed to be a weapon. Years passed. Slowly. Steadily. Brenda kept changing. Not overnight. Not magically. She apologized to teachers she had tormented. To classmates she had humiliated. Even to my mother-in-law, who nearly fainted when a 16-year-old Brenda appeared at her door and sincerely apologized for encouraging her cruelty toward me. The biggest surprise came on my 65th birthday. The house was packed with family. Grandchildren ran through the living room. Laughter echoed everywhere. I sat in my favorite chair, watching the chaos. Then someone tapped a spoon against a glass. The room quieted. Brenda stood. Her hands were trembling. She looked around the room. Then at me. When I was little, she began, I thought honesty meant saying whatever hurt the most. The room grew silent. I thought being truthful gave me permission to be cruel. She smiled sadly. I was wrong. Her eyes found mine. The greatest truth of my life is that I should have lost my family. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't. Her voice shook. Because my parents refused to give up on me. I felt Chris's hand close around mine. Brenda took a breath. My mother saved me twice. The room was utterly still. The first time, she saved me from the people who gave birth to me. Tears filled her eyes. The second time, she saved me from becoming the kind of person they were. I couldn't stop the tears anymore. Neither could Chris. Brenda stepped down from the front of the room. walked straight over, and knelt beside my chair, exactly as she had once promised she never would. She took my hands, pressed them gently against her forehead, and whispered, "When you're old, Mom." A watery laugh escaped her. "I'll take care of you." This time, there was no smile of cruelty, no hidden agenda, no delight in causing pain, just love. And for the first time since the day we brought her home, I knew with absolute certainty that the little girl we had rescued was finally gone, and the daughter we had always hoped for was finally here. The room erupted into applause. Some people were crying, others were openly wiping their eyes. Chris looked like he was trying very hard not to sob in front of everyone. He failed, spectacularly. Brenda laughed through her own tears and hugged him. For a few minutes, the entire room felt warm, peaceful, complete. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months later, I was sorting through old paperwork when I found a yellowed envelope tucked into the back of our filing cabinet. I frowned. The envelope had a case number written on it, one I hadn't seen in decades. Immediately, I knew what it was. The original trafficking investigation. I hadn't looked at those records in years. Part of me wanted to put them back. Part of me couldn't. So I opened them. Inside were photographs, reports, witness statements, and a small handwritten note from the detective who had worked the case. The same detective who had stood in my living room all those years ago while Brenda tried to convince him I was a kidnapper. I sat down and began reading. The note was dated shortly after the adoption had been finalized. It read, "If you're reading this, then Brenda is probably old enough to know the truth. I've worked hundreds of cases in my career. Most children rescued from situations like hers never fully recover. Many end up back in dangerous environments. Some disappear into the system entirely. You and your husband fought harder for this little girl than I've ever seen anyone fight for a child who wasn't biologically theirs. Whatever happens, never doubt that you gave her a chance she otherwise wouldn't have had." My vision blurred. I had forgotten this note existed. Then I noticed something folded behind it. A second page. One I had never seen before. My heart skipped. It was addressed specifically to Brenda. Apparently the detective had written it years ago and asked that it only be given to her as an adult. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called her. An hour later she arrived. The moment she saw my expression, she grew worried. "Mom," I handed her the envelope. "What's this?" "Something that belongs to you." She sat beside me and opened it. As she read, tears slowly began sliding down her face. The detective had retired years earlier, but his words were simple. "Brenda, you won't remember me. When you were 7 years old, you tried very hard to convince me your mother was a criminal. At the time, I thought your behavior was unusual. After reviewing your case file, I understood why. Children learn survival in different ways. Some become quiet. Some become fearful. Some become angry. Some learn to hurt others before others can hurt them. What mattered wasn't who you were at 7. What mattered was who you chose to become afterward. Your parents chose you. Never forget that. When I retired, I checked your file one last time. I wanted to know whether the little girl who enjoyed breaking hearts had found one of her own. I hope she did." Brenda lowered the letter. She couldn't speak. Neither could I. Finally she laughed through her tears. "He knew." I smiled. Apparently, he knew exactly what I was like. He was a detective. She shook her head. I was awful. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You were a child." "No." She looked down. I was worse than that. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she folded the letter carefully, almost reverently. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." A strange smile touched my lips. "Funny." "What?" There were times I thought about it. Her eyes widened. I had never admitted that before. Not to anyone. There were nights I sat awake wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake. Her face crumpled. "I know." I blinked. "What?" She swallowed hard. I knew even back then. The admission shocked me. "What do you mean?" Brenda stared at the floor. "I knew I was hurting you." The room became silent. I knew every single time. The words came slowly. "I just didn't care." My heart tightened. She continued. "But one day I started noticing something." "What?" No matter how horrible I was, tears filled her eyes again. "You still packed my lunches." My throat closed. "You still sat beside me when I was sick." Her voice trembled. "You still came to every school event." She laughed weakly. "You still loved me." I couldn't stop crying now. Neither could she. And eventually she whispered, "I realized I didn't deserve it." I pulled her into my arms. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Outside, evening sunlight filtered through the windows. The years felt impossibly far away. The little girl who had once tried to have me arrested. The teenager who had finally learned remorse. The woman sitting beside me now. They all felt like different people. Yet somehow they were all Brenda. Eventually she pulled back and smiled. "You know something?" "What?" "If that detective were still alive." I raised an eyebrow. "What about him?" She laughed softly. "I think I'd finally tell him the truth." "What truth?" She looked at me. The same eyes. The same face. But an entirely different heart. Then she smiled and said, "The woman I tried to send to prison was the best mother in the world." A few years later, the truth of those words was tested. Not by Brenda. By me. I was 72 when the doctors found the tumor. It wasn't immediately fatal, but it wasn't good either. The kind of diagnosis that makes conversations stop halfway through. The kind that changes the atmosphere in a room before anyone says a word. I still remember sitting in the hospital parking lot afterward. Chris was gripping the steering wheel. Neither of us moved. Finally he whispered, "We'll fight it." I nodded. But for the first time in a very long time, I was afraid. When we told Brenda, she didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring, as if her brain had stopped working. Then she stood up and walked out of the room. I found her 20 minutes later in the backyard, crying so hard she could barely breathe. The sight stunned me. This was the same little girl who had once cheerfully announced that I should hurry up and be put 6 feet under. The same child who had laughed when I got hurt. Now she looked completely shattered. The moment she saw me, she rushed over and wrapped her arms around me. "No." Her voice broke. "No, no, no. Brenda." "No." She shook her head violently. "You are not allowed to leave." My eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart. You promised." "I never promised that." "Then promise now." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking. I held her tightly. "I can't." For a long moment she just cried. Eventually she whispered, "I'm not ready." Neither was I. The months that followed were difficult. There were treatments, appointments, good days, bad days. And through all of it, Brenda was there. Every single day. When I woke up after procedures, she was there. When I felt too weak to cook, she was there. When I wanted company, she was there. When I wanted silence, she sat quietly beside me and held my hand. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting treatment, I woke up in a hospital room. The sunlight was fading. The room was dim. Brenda was asleep in a chair beside my bed. A blanket was draped over her. One hand was still resting on mine. I stared at her for a long time. Then something occurred to me. Decades earlier, when she had been sick with the flu, I had sat beside her bed exactly like that. Night after night. Watching. Waiting. Refusing to leave. Now she was doing the same for me. The circle had finally closed. A quiet laugh escaped me. Brenda stirred awake. Immediately. As if she had been trained to respond to the slightest movement. "Mom, I'm okay." She exhaled shakily. "You scared me." I squeezed her hand. "You know," she looked up. "You kept your promise." Her eyes immediately filled. "What promise?" "When you said you'd take care of me when I got old." The tears spilled over. She laughed and cried at the same time. "I was a horrible kid." "You were." A shocked sound escaped her. "Mom." I smiled.
"What?"
"It's true."
She groaned.
Then buried her face in her hands. And for the first time in years, we both laughed until we cried. Months later, my condition finally stabilized. Not cured, but stable. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. One evening I found Brenda sitting alone on the porch, thinking. She looked older now. Not old, just mature. The kind of maturity earned through mistakes.
He sat beside her.
"What are you thinking about?" She hesitated, then said, "The phone call." I immediately knew which one. The call she made when she was 7. The one trying to have me arrested. I still think about it. I nodded. "So, do I?" She looked down. "Do you ever wish you'd never adopted me?" The question hung between us. A younger version of me might have needed time to answer. This version didn't.
"No."
She blinked. "Really? Really? But I made your life miserable." "Sometimes." "Sometimes?" I stared at her. "Brenda, you once tried to send me to prison." A laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. Then another. Soon we were both laughing. When it finally faded, I turned serious. "Listen to me." She met my eyes. "If I had the chance to go back and choose again," my voice softened, "I would still choose you." Her lips trembled. Every single time. She broke down crying. Not the desperate tears of a child. Not the guilty tears of a teenager. The grateful tears of a woman who finally believed she was loved. The sky above us slowly darkened. The porch light flickered on. And as I sat beside my daughter, I realized something. The greatest truth Brenda had ever learned wasn't about adoption, or biology, or even kindness. It was this. Love isn't proven when someone is easy to love. Love is proven when they aren't. And despite everything, the insults, the cruelty, the heartbreak, the years of pain, I would still choose her. Every single time. 10 years later, I was 82. The doctors had long since stopped giving exact predictions. At that age, every year felt borrowed. Every birthday felt like a gift. Chris and I had grown slower. Our hair had turned completely white. The stairs in the house seemed steeper every year. But we were still together. Still stubborn. Still arguing about ridiculous things like whose turn it was to water the plants. One autumn evening, I sat in my favorite chair by the window. The sunset painted the sky gold and orange. The house was full. Grandchildren raced through the hallways. Family photographs covered every wall. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. It was everything I had ever wanted. Brenda entered carrying a tray. She set a cup of tea beside me.
"Careful," she said.
"It's hot." I smiled. "You're starting to sound like me. You've been saying that for 20 years. And you've been ignoring me for 20 years. She laughed. The sound was warm, comfortable, home. For a while we simply sat together, watching the sunset. Then she quietly reached into her pocket. "Mom, yes, I have something for you." She placed a small folded piece of paper into my hands. The paper was old, very old, yellow around the edges. I unfolded it slowly. The moment I saw it, I froze. It was the detective's business card. The same one he had given her all those years ago. The one she had proudly clutched after trying to have me arrested. I looked up in surprise. "You kept this. For 75 years. I stared at her. "Why?" A sad smile crossed her face. "Because every time I looked at it, I remembered the worst thing I'd ever done." My eyes softened. "Brenda." She shook her head. "Let me finish." Her voice trembled. "When I was little, I thought honesty meant saying whatever crossed my mind." She laughed softly. "I thought cruelty and truth were the same thing." The room had gone quiet. Without us noticing, Chris and the rest of the family had gathered nearby, listening. Brenda took a shaky breath. But the older I got, the more I realized something. She looked directly at me. The truest thing anyone ever told me wasn't something I said. A tear slid down her cheek. "It was something you showed me." My vision blurred. She knelt beside my chair, just like she had done years earlier. "Love." The room was completely silent. "You loved me when I was lovable." Another tear fell. "You loved me when I wasn't." Her voice broke. "You loved me when I deserved it." Then she shook her head. "And when I didn't." I couldn't speak anymore. Neither could Chris. Brenda carefully took my hands. The same hands that had fed her, protected her, held her through nightmares, bandaged scraped knees, signed adoption papers, wiped away tears. The same hands she had once tried so hard to hurt. "You saved my life." I shook my head.
"No."
"Yes. No, sweetheart."
My voice was weak now.
"You saved your own life." She began crying openly. I reached up and gently brushed away her tears. Just like I had when she was 7. Just like I had when she was 17. Just like I had when she was 40. Some things never changed. A few months later, winter arrived. The world outside was quiet, peaceful. One night I woke up and knew. There was no fear. No panic. Just certainty. Chris was asleep beside me. After all those decades, he still slept with one hand reaching toward my side of the bed. I smiled. Then I looked toward the doorway. Brenda was there. She had stayed overnight.
As she often did now.
Somehow she sensed I was awake. She came over immediately. Mom, I took her hand. The same little hand I had once pulled from the grasp of traffickers. The same hand that had once dialed the police trying to have me arrested. The same hand that now trembled as it held mine. You know what? I whispered.
What?
A tear rolled down her cheek. I smiled. You turned out pretty well. She laughed through her tears.
No.
Yes.
No.
I squeezed her hand. Yes. For a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl she used to be. Then she bent down and rested her forehead against mine. I love you, Mom. The words were simple, but they were the most precious words I had ever heard, because I knew how hard she had fought to become the person capable of saying them. I love you too. Those were the last words I ever spoke, and they were enough. Years later, after Chris had joined me and the house belonged to new generations, Brenda would sometimes sit with her grandchildren and tell them a story, not about traffickers, not about detectives, not about adoption. She told them about truth. She would smile and say, when I was little, I thought telling the truth meant saying things that hurt people. Then she'd point to an old family photograph hanging on the wall, a picture of a smiling woman holding a stubborn little girl. And she'd finish with a lesson that took her a lifetime to learn. The truth should help people see clearly, not make them suffer. Then she'd touch the corner of the photograph and smile, because the greatest truth of her life was the woman in that picture. The mother who chose her. The mother who forgave her. The mother who never gave up on her. And in the end, that love became the truth that changed everything.